guys, welcome back to a Frame a Day workout with Helen Chen. So today we're going to be doing another shot from Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, and that's because I wanted to do something a little bit more subtle. So one of the things that, like, when I think about Lord of the Rings, I think about like a lot of obviously besides the fantasy part, I think about a lot of like, you know, like Vaseline on the lens, like glamour shot, like glowy elves and things like that. And so I decided to do this shot because of that. It's actually very simple, and in its simplicity, it's super beautiful. Especially this figure, Galadriel, or this elf, is supposed to be like super angelic, and like, you know, light over dark kind of a thing. And that contrasts super well since she's lit like that for the entirety of her time on screen. When it switches to like evil her and that fugue dream moment is very jarring, and she barely even looks like herself. And so I just think that that contrast is pretty neat and interesting and beautiful. And even though I confess that I don't like painting nature, I felt like I needed to do a little bit of it in this course. So this is as good as it's gonna get. But yeah, I just really love the subtle nature of this. How it's very kind of like almost one, like maybe three levels here. We have the background that kind of, you know, all melds into one, and then we have Galadriel, which is the light standing in the middle. You know, and then we have kind of the foreground, which isn't even that dark. Like if I was to turn this image into like a true black and white image, I think the darkest we would ever get in the front there, it would be would feel pretty gray. Maybe this, it's the exact same value actually. This looks like for my Photoshop application window, maybe a little bit lighter. So that's kind of what I like about this, is that it's very kind of like low contrast. A lot of Lord of the Rings shots are. There's not a lot of like, unless you get to like the really evil like Mordor stuff. Like in the world and things like that, they keep things pretty high key for the most part, which is great. You know, it provides contrast within the film, and it really lets you know who the evil people are. um, but yeah, but there's this glowing figure in the middle, and it's one of these like classic kind of you know, low risk shots. You know, have a beautiful figure standing in the center. Like you could even see this shot in other movies, like if you think about it, like Lady of the Lake or anything, you know, like they would use a similar shot like this. So just like in the last video for those mountains, I'm going to be leaning into some brushes that we haven't used yet in this course. You don't have to use these, just choose any brush that gives you a bit of a kind of a texture or like scattering effect, because I don't want to go in and paint every one of those leaves. I just want to leave an impression of smaller shapes, and I'm letting the brush do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now, is I'm setting the groundwork to have that feeling and not have to work too hard later to get it to kind of you know, read as foliage. And I'm trying a couple of different brushes here. I don't use these brushes that often, so I'm a little bit experimenting. But anything in your arsenal and in your settings that you've used and liked before and can kind of get that feeling, I would recommend using. Like it really doesn't matter. It's more about getting the feeling of texture back there rather than specific like leaf shapes and things like that. So the only other thing that kind of stands out in this image, besides the figure in terms of just having stuff in the frame, is this double tree trunk thing. So I mean, in the way that the frame is right now, because the value is so similar to the stuff around it, it barely kind of jumps out. You just kind of see it and detect it, and this in this way, it doesn't draw any attention away from the figure. But I am going to kind of like go in with the contrast a little bit more because I know I can always kind of like paint over it and bring it back and get it to sit back in space a little bit. So I would rather just focus on getting some of the pattern breakup and the texture in the tree trunk right now, and then worry about the, you know, overall value of it and how it sits in the frame kind of later. So now that I have some of those kind of details like blocked in, I can, you know, I'm going to actually use kind of a lighter blue, the background color especially, just to get it to marry with the background more, and push the tree back a little bit in space and in value, and get it to kind of be a little bit closer. And then this way I can also work on getting some of the little more fiddly details in and around the tree trunks as well, like the foliage, like that fern or plant or whatever that's on the left, things like that. So I can start building in some of those textures. And I really just want to focus on things that stand out. And the only pieces of foliage that stand out to me right now is that fern on the that I talked about next to the tree, and then the foreground plants to the left that are laid on top of that streak of light, which I'm sure they manufactured and put in there with, like, you know, a light source and some haze and things like that. So here I'm painting in the foliage, and I'm approaching it much like I would like any other piece, like even the trunk and things like that. I'm looking at it mostly not as a plant, but as like a collection of shapes and different hues and values. So I want to make sure that I get at least some of the subtlety of, you know, whatever those flower-like things are, as opposed to all green leaves and things like that, just to make sure that it doesn't seem like, you know, too one-dimensional. Like one of the things that I learned about foliage, especially, is if you just assume everything is green, it tends to look really fake. And it's a combination of these like warmer colors that really help the green feel even more alive. And so it's making sure that I get that. So a lot of my greens, when I do choose greens on my own for like a VisDev painting, I tend to choose patches of color that look like it's green with red added into it, and it just makes things like feel a little bit more vibrant and even a little bit more like plant-like, even though, you know, you could be looking at a tree that's very, very green, you know, and it just adds a little bit of life to it. So I feel like most of the background is sitting okay. I might add a little bit more detail, especially to the left, but I know that there's also going to be a light source that obscures some of it, so I'm not as concerned about that. Right now, what is important though is to get the foreground in place. So I'm trying to choose a value that can represent it. Because it is pretty, if you look at it, there's a lot of little detail and a lot of like hue changes and value changes and stuff within it. But for the most part, it's almost like one big chunk that's framing the character. So getting that in early and making sure that that value seems correct is going to help a lot. Same thing with the foliage in the back. I'm just going to paint this, foreground foliage on a separate layer so I can throw some of that light in the back there. But it's not about, drawing every single leaf. It's better to use something scratchy to kind of like give that feeling. Just painting my way over to the right, get some of this stuff in there. Another helpful thing when it comes to foliage is if you think of them as like one large object instead of like an object made up of like a million different little objects. And what I mean by that is like when I think about like painting a shrub, I think about it like if you think about one of those normal kind of like decorative shrubs that people have in front of their houses, like in Burbank or something, like I would paint a ball and then add some texture on top of it, but treat it like it's one whole thing versus a bunch of little things. And then I feel like that's an easy way to approach things like foliage. And it's the only way that I can actually handle it without being too overwhelmed. I'm going to put in a little bit of that blue mist and some of that lighting there. I really love, especially with these kind of like streaks of light, they're not all equally soft on all edges. And so sometimes what I'll do is I will use a hard edged brush to do the light ray. And then I will like blur it out and then really eat into the underside of it to be a lot softer. So What I mean is that so that instead of having a ray of light that is equally soft on all sides, like on both sides, you get one side that's a little bit kind of like a softer fallout, and one side that's a little bit of a harder one. And so it feels more like a ray of light. It feels like there's an object that's blocking the ray fully. And so that's kind of like the feeling that I'm trying to get when I use, a hard edge versus a soft edge. Because in blurring, you'll see that you kind of even preserve that harder edge a little bit, and so that it doesn't feel too equal. Finally, we can get into the figure. Now, the figure was kind of hard for me, actually. I kept on sensing almost like, and maybe it's because of all the blue and green around it. For some reason, I actually felt like the shadow side of her and her all white dress was almost purplish. So I'm thinking I'm trying to get that in there and testing it out, but it's just very subtle. So I know this is one of those where I'm just going to be like painting a layer and then messing with the opacity to get the right kind of hue and value. Figure like this that's pretty far away, it's even more important not to get too caught up on the details. I just want like and what's so great about this figure in particular is that there's a lot, there's like little hints at what's going on underneath that you don't actually have to put that much information in. Even that kind of like that little bit of flesh where her hands are clasped in front makes that little triangle shape. With even just putting that in, you get the sense that her hands are folded and in front of her body. like that. Like you barely, you just have to put in that little shape and that reads, and maybe a little bit of overlap with the sleeves, and then that's it. Looking at it a little bit far away, I'm noticing that the cloth feels a little bit cooler in the reference than the one I'm getting. So I'm going to choose a blue that's kind of like related to some of the blues that are already in here, paint it in, and then mess with the opacity and see if that does it. And now I'm going to add a little bit of that, the glow. Nothing says Lord of the Rings to me than like the Vaseline and the lens, like glamour shot glow that's present in a lot of these shots featuring very mystical elves. So actually, as I was recording this, I noticed that some of the values, especially in the upper right and tree area, were a little bit darker than the reference, and it really bugged me. So I actually reopened the file and adjusted that. So now we're finished. Thank you guys so much. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.